Let's begin our discussion of the lymphatic system. This system includes your immune system, and together this system accomplishes three important functions. The first one we've already learned. We've learned that at capillaries, blood capillaries, there's an accumulation of interstitial fluid outside of the blood vessels due to this imbalance that occurs between filtration and reabsorption. Therefore, in order to remove or drain that excess interstitial fluid, you need lymphatic vessels, in particular the lymphatic capillaries, to collect this excess interstitial fluid from tissues and return it to the bloodstream where it originated from. So that function we've discussed previously. The second important function works with your digestive system. So when you ingest, digest, and absorb nutrients, most nutrients enter your bloodstream. And if you recall, that blood is then transported to the liver via the hepatic portal system. There's a few exceptions, and they include the dietary lipids. So fatty acids, which come from triglyceride digestion, lipid-soluble vitamins, which include vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and K, get absorbed into the lymphatics as opposed to your blood. And will follow this lymph as it drains, it goes eventually into your bloodstream. The third function is its relationship with the immune system. So the lymphatic system works well with the immune system to carry out immune responses, which protect you from foreign entities like viruses, bacteria, and other pathogens. So those are the three important functions we're going to be discussing in this PowerPoint. The most complicated is obviously number 3, the immune responses. Let's begin by just mentioning some of the main components, organs of your lymphatic system. You'll notice in this drawing you see a lot of green vessels. Those are your lymphatic vessels. And lymphatic vessels all arise from lymphatic capillaries, which would be the microscopic vessels that you don't see on this drawing. But everywhere you're going to have blood vessels, you're going to have lymphatic capillaries. Eventually, those lymphatic capillaries merge together to form larger vessels. And then eventually, the two largest lymphatic vessels, which are known as lymphatic ducts. And we'll look at a better picture coming up, but there's one known as the thoracic duct, which comes up your chest and empties into your left subclavian vein. And then there's also a right lymphatic duct, which empties into your right subclavian vein. So that's the destination of your lymph, is to get it back into the bloodstream at the subclavian veins. There's a small reservoir in your abdomen that collects a lot of the lymph from below this structure, and that is known as the cisterna chyli. So this, you'll notice a lot of lymphatic vessels from your legs and your abdomen combine into a little reservoir. And then from that reservoir, it travels up the thoracic duct. Then you have all the different lymph nodes, not different, but different locations of lymph nodes throughout the body. Some suggest there's 500 to 600 lymph nodes scattered throughout the body, and these are found in particular regions, so they're clustered in certain areas. You'll notice there's a lot of them in the groin region. These are known as inguinal lymph nodes because there's a lot of lymph coming from legs. There's a lot of them that sit along your iliacs, known as iliac lymph nodes. There's a lot of them in your abdomen. There's a lot of them sitting in with the small intestines, called intestinal nodes. Some of them are known as mesenteric lymph nodes. There's a lot of them in your armpits, so the axillary lymph nodes. There's quite a few in your chest. We'll look at a more detailed picture. There's a number of them in your neck and underneath your mandible. Cervical lymph nodes in the neck, submandibular lymph nodes under the mandible. But they're found all over the place. And we typically use regional terms to name the lymph nodes. Bone marrow is going to be an important tissue. It produces your immune cells. So not just your red blood cells and platelets, but all your different immune cells, your lymphocytes, your macrophages. Those are all produced by your bone marrow. Your spleen, we're going to talk more about the spleen in this system. We've already learned that it helps to remove red blood cells and platelets, but it also acts as a giant lymph node. It filters blood, though, instead of lymph. So blood will enter the spleen, and the spleen will have a lot of our immune cells looking for any pathogens that might have gotten into the bloodstream. Lymphatic nodules are much like lymph nodes in that they house a lot of immune cells. The difference is a nodule isn't a defined organ with a capsule, so it's more like a patch of tissue. Tonsils are also just an area of tissue that contains a lot of immune system. And we'll probably identify all these tonsils when we get to the respiratory system, because they're all found on those passageways, either from in the back of your mouth or in the back of your throat or the back of your tongue. So there's a number of different tonsils, such as the palatine tonsils. The palatine tonsils sit on each side of your soft palate, and they're positioned there in a way that if pathogens you ingest or breathe in try to penetrate into the body, we have immune system there waiting. And those tonsils have been known to swell if there is an infection. And then you've got the different immune cells. We're going to be talking a lot about lymphocytes, T lymphocytes and B lymphocytes, but also macrophages and other immune cells. So that's kind of an introduction to some of the organs and cells and tissue that we'll be discussing. This picture shows us the collection of interstitial fluid that occurs. So in this picture here, you'll notice your blood vessels. Here's an arterial leading to a capillary, leading to a venule. And remember this concept that there's filtration that occurs, pushing fluid out. Then there's reabsorption that occurs, pulling fluid back in. But there's going to be a buildup of fluid in between these cells. And that fluid is known as interstitial fluid. And as that fluid accumulates, so we can look at this picture here, there's a small amount of pressure that's going to drive that fluid into the lymphatic capillaries. And these lymphatic capillaries are what's known as a closed capillary. There's just an end here. And the cells, the endothelial cells, have this overlapping structure. What that allows is a one-way flow into the lymphatic capillary. So once that fluid flows in, you can imagine it has a very difficult time flowing out. So that's a way that we can collect this fluid. Then this pressure builds up in the capillary and helps drive the lymph flow. There's no pump to your lymphatics, so it's a very, very low pressure system. So it requires valves. There's going to be a lot of valves in your lymphatic vessels, and it requires that this fluid can only enter and not leave the lymphatics. So this is how this lymph is produced. So it begins as interstitial fluid, but once it's not in between cells anymore, but it's in a lymphatic vessel, we change the name. But lymph is almost identical to interstitial fluid. It's just in a different location now. It's in your lymphatics. As that lymph is collected, it drains into larger lymphatics. This is a more detailed picture showing the larger lymphatics. So we have the right lymphatic duct, which collects fluid from all the yellow areas on this drawing. So you'll notice that all the yellow areas, so the right side of the head and neck, the right chest, and the right arm, is going to drain via the right lymphatic duct into the right subclavian vein. Really, it's right at the place where the jugular vein merges together with the subclavian vein. Right about there is where the lymph enters. The thoracic duct, or left lymphatic duct, comes up from the cisterna chyli. So there's that reservoir, that little sac that collects a lot of lymph. And then up from the cisterna chyli is the thoracic duct. And it travels up your chest and then eventually drains into the left subclavian vein right at the merge of the jugular and the left subclavian vein. So that thoracic duct, you'll notice on this drawing, collects more lymph. It collects the entire left side of the body and everything below your diaphragm. So all your intestines, all your abdominal organs are going to drain via the left lymphatic duct, or also known as the thoracic duct. So that means, if you refer back to that second major function, collection of dietary lipids, those lipids are coming up the thoracic duct and go into your left subclavian vein as opposed to your right. So there's a little bit of difference between the right and the left when it comes to lymphatic drainage. This looks like a very complicated figure, and it kind of is. It overcomplicates matters. But if you look closely, the idea is here, at systemic capillaries, you're losing some fluid from the blood. Interstitial fluid accumulates. It's going to be collected in your lymphatic capillaries, which are found wherever there are blood capillaries. Those capillaries merge into vessels. The lymph will run through filters known as lymph nodes. So notice that that represents a lymph node that's going to filter out any pathogens. Any foreign substances that gets collected, we want to get them. We want to have lymph nodes harboring immune system to destroy those pathogens. Then eventually that lymph is going to drain. We've got some valves to make sure that the lymph is going to flow in one direction. And eventually you'll notice right here it's being delivered back into the bloodstream via the subclavian veins. You'll also notice your pulmonary capillaries are also important to be looked at for excess interstitial fluid. So you're going to have lymphatic capillaries wherever you have pulmonary capillaries as well that drain that fluid. So this is kind of a schematic showing again that collection of interstitial fluid, which becomes lymph, filtering it through lymph nodes, and then bringing it back into the bloodstream at subclavian veins.